Hello, and welcome back to Scientific Terminology. Today we're going to be talking about the tragedy of the commons, which was originally an economic term that has now been adopted by biologists, ecologists, and environmental scientists to explain some policy decision making and also just a general need to maintain public goods like the environment. So let's get started with learning about the tragedy of the commons. First of all, it would be really important to know what is a commons exactly. And a commons is a public space used by everyone, like a library or a public park, or if we wanted to get more general, it could be something like the entire planet. It's something that we all have to use. In this video, we're going to often refer to English grazing lands, and these are the public grazing lands in England that were public and used to develop this idea in the 1800s. Despite the specificness of the grazing commons in England, the concept we talk about applies to tons of other situations, whether it be water rights, the planet, the carbon dioxide usage, all of that stuff. It still applies. Now, more specifically, the tragedy of the commons is the idea that when given a public and shared resource like grazing land, individuals will make decisions that benefit themselves individually instead of doing what's best for the common good. And by acting in their self-interest, the users of these resources will deplete the resource, making it unusable for everybody, which, if you think about it right, isn't great. So that's not something that we really want. So biologists and environmental scientists and policymakers use this tragedy of the commons idea to try to stop this depletion of resources. So where did this idea originate from? Well, the tragedy of the commons was first conceived by British economist William Forster Lloyd in 1833. Garrett Hardin, an ecologist, wrote an article entitled The Tragedy of the Commons in 1968, which took this term and added it into scientists' lexicon. Scientists have since spent a great deal of time and resources studying this issue and how it affects different parts of the environment and the earth. So let's take an example. Back in England in the 1800s and earlier, there were commons spread throughout the English countryside. Basically, they were plots or squares of land where the farmers in the various vicinity would be allowed to graze their animals. In this case, we'll go with little sheeps. Now, when we don't regulate the commons, oftentimes the farmers would leave their sheep there and they would use up all the resource, and then they would all end up being hurt, right? The sheep wouldn't be able to eat, and they'd all lose out. So how could we prevent this tragedy? There are many ways to prevent the exhaustion of resources, and in some cases that might mean the government would regulate the commons to ensure careful management, and other times it could mean that it could get privatized, meaning it would be broken up into individual pieces, so it would only hurt individuals if they were to destroy it. So here's what that would look like. In top-down regulation, they might split the commons up and say you could only use it during a certain time, and then we'd let the other part grow, and then they'd switch at different months. Or if you were to privatize it, right, each farmer would get a section of it, and then they could manage their own section individually. But then there's also the idea that we could maybe have community cooperation, where each farmer works together to utilize the field together, and we don't waste that resource. Destruction of common resources can have a huge impact on the environment. Resources like water, air, or the starry sky are all commons that can be damaged or destroyed by individuals' actions. Many environmental laws and regulations work based off the lessons that we get from the tragedy of the commons scenario. Thank you so much for watching and learning about the tragedy of the commons. If you're interested in learning more about environmental issues, I would suggest doing your own research a little bit and then getting in contact with your own legislators to make sure that we're doing our best to save the environment. To subscribe to learn more science, and we'll see you next time for more scientific terminology. Thanks again for watching.